So after this, you don't have to use your mind anymore. If that was your takeaway, I failed this quarter, but I thought, as I'm thinking, how about the mind, I realized that for me, after all is said and done, in pretty much everything in life, I have to go back to the basics in order to really appreciate anything. And you'll find this to be true in sports, right? If you talk to the greatest coaches, ultimately they will always talk about getting back to the fundamentals, get back to the basics. And oftentimes when we go awry in things in life, whether it be a business that does so or a marriage or anything, you find that somehow you've forgotten the things that got you there in the first place. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at what it takes to get back to the basics. What does it mean to live as God wishes for us to live? And in order to do that, we're going to go to the Old Testament. We're going to look at the book of Micah. Now, Micah, to give you a little bit of historical context, is a counterpart to Isaiah. At the time that Isaiah was preaching and primarily was in Jerusalem and preaching to the kings and the royalty, Micah seemed to be preaching to the common man. Same message, but different audience. And ultimately, they both were saying the same thing. Right now may seem like a good time in the nation of Israel because they had a pretty good king at the time of Isaiah and Micah. But keep in mind, you have to get back to God or things will fall apart. A good king is not a replacement for personal service and faith in God. And so Micah, as he spoke to the common people, realized this. In some respects, even more so than Isaiah, he will emphasize this idea that if you rely on other people to lead in faith, what happens when those other people go away? Because in Israel, what happened was when the good kings disappeared, the idolatry flooded right back into the land. The same idolatry that men like Hezekiah or Josiah got rid of would come right back once those kings were gone. You know why? Because the people had always had the idols in their hearts. Their minds had never truly been convinced to leave idolatry. And so Micah is addressing, saying, now look, you may think that just because at this time temple worship looks pretty good, we're back to keeping the Passover, all of these things outwardly are going as they ought, that somehow that means everything is good for you as an individual. No, that's not it. And that brings us to Micah 6. Because in Micah chapter 6, starting in verse 6, he will explain why other people, or at the corporate level, meaning the nation of Israel, even though the nation was worshiping God the way they ought, the Passover had been reinstituted, temple worship was reinstituted. Even though that was going on, that is not enough to replace individual service to God. Oh, I'm supposed to wear that thing. Oh, yeah. How about that? Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Matt. Most tech problems are operator error. I just am here to illustrate that. Okay, so, and I really, the funny thing is I'm talking, and I can hear myself, and I think, man, I'm just kind of losing my voice today. I'm just not very loud. So, Micah will address this with individuals who have banked their faith on really the obedience of others. And he says, with what shall I come to the Lord and bow myself before the God on high? Shall I come to him with burnt offerings, with yearling calves? This is referencing going to the temple, making these sacrifices that at the time Micah wrote were actually happening. He says, does the Lord take delight in thousands of rams, in 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I present my firstborn for my rebellious acts, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul. As Micah progresses here, he gets more and more absurd. He starts out, he says, well, should I come with burnt offerings and yearling calves? And you can almost hear the audience say, yes, yes, that's what you're supposed to do. Bring your sacrifices. That will do it. That will delight the Lord. He goes, okay. Well, what if I brought 1,000 rams and 10,000 rivers of oil? I mean, if what will delight the Lord is burnt offerings and yearling calves, certainly that will do it, right? The more the merrier. And then he goes to the absurd. Shall I present my firstborn for my rebellious acts? The fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He says, what if I make the ultimate sort of sacrifice of even child sacrifices? And by the time you get down to child sacrifices, you can almost hear the audience that had initially said, yeah, this is it. We offer our burnt offerings and God will be happy. Well, 1,000 rams kind of feels like a lot, but okay. Whoa, Micah. We're not talking about child sacrifice here. You can see them and almost hear them recognizing the absurdity of the argument, because what Micah has done is a great, brilliant argument. He's taken it to the absurd. And then he finishes it off with the verse that is probably the most iconic of all of the book of Micah. He's told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. The turn of this is so beautiful in that what he's doing is he's showing the absurdity of more. I can do this bigger, grander thing. Make our worship bigger, more impressive. Make the songs fancier. Add a smoke machine. Let's add a light show. Let's make this as big as possible. That'll do it, right? And his whole point is at the end, he says, this is absurd. And I could take you to other places that make it very clear that, look, those rivers of oil, who gave you those rivers of oil in the first place? It's God. And the cattle on 1,000 hills belong to Him. If you offer Him 1,000 rams, He owns 1,000 hills that have rams on them. It's absurd. So if your idea is, I'll come to God with more and then He'll be exceedingly delighting in me. If Jerusalem can have the best Passover ever, if we can make the biggest deal out of this event, that'll do it, right? No. Instead, what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. The first thing I want you to see is that Micah is teaching a principle that holds true throughout the Bible, that force is not a replacement for faith. And here's what I mean by that. You have probably at some point in your life gotten into the trap of counting up the good deeds that you have done and finding confidence in your salvation because you have done so many good things. Or you may have done the exact opposite. And you have counted up all of the bad deeds that you have done, all the failures, all the rebellious acts. And you have counted and you said, okay, I've crossed a threshold. I've committed so many that there is no path back. And do you understand that both of those are the same coin, just two different sides? That if my attitude is, I will get to heaven because I have done this thing and this thing and this thing, and if I could just do enough good things, if I could just serve with enough bravery and courage and mettle, if I could do enough things that people would say of me, this one is a pillar of faith, so that my reputation is of somebody who has done great and mighty deeds in the name of the Lord. That'll get me to heaven. I would argue you need to go to 1 Corinthians 13. Because 1 Corinthians 13 starts out with the very idea that if I sacrifice even my very own body to be burned, but I have not love, it is worth nothing. And the other side of that coin, If I count up my good deeds, that doesn't get me to heaven. If I count up my bad deeds, that doesn't keep me from it. Because how many bad deeds does it take to send you to hell? The answer, folks, is one. Everything else is just gravy. I mean, the idea of counting up and saying, I've done so many bad things. Why did you count after you got to one? If you're worried about going to hell because of so many bad things you've done, let me tell you, all you have to do is count the first one that comes to mind and you're worthy of hell. That's all you have to count. Just one. It's the easiest math ever. So piling more on and more on may have some sort of emotional impact on you, but in terms of the impact on your salvation, it is no more, 1 versus 10,000, no different. They separate you from God. And so this idea that by either counting our good deeds, I can have confidence, or by counting my bad deeds, I can quake in my boots. That is not the way to think of it. And Micah is addressing this, interestingly enough, before Jesus has even come. This principle that you will be saved by faith in Jesus, saved by trusting in Him and following Him, this idea of being saved by faith is found throughout the Bible. He's told you, oh man, what is good. It's not some fancy worship service. That's not going to get God's attention. It's not some great Naaman-like deed. This is, some powerful thing I've done, and now all of a sudden I've got the favor of the Lord. What does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. So that's what we're going to look at. Just get back to fundamentals. What does it mean to live a life of faith? Because Micah tells you, and he keeps it very simple, and boy, I love that. Because simple I can do. You know, Scott got up here and he led a prayer, and one of the things he talked about is simple people with simple minds. And I kind of chuckled a little bit because he just called all of us simple-minded people. And we all nodded our heads, amen. It's funny, but it's also true. We're just simple people living our lives, and if you make it too complicated, you'll probably give up on faith. And that happens all the time, where people just feel like it's just too much and I can't ever do enough, and so their faith is overthrown by overcomplicating it. Get back to the fundamentals. So let's do that. First, before we get into the ones that everybody notices, do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God, I want you to see the very beginning. He has told you, oh man, what is good. What a beautiful phrase that is. This idea that we somehow have to figure out what will make Him happy as if we're reading tea leaves. You probably have some relationships in your life that are that way. You know those passive-aggressive people in your life that won't tell you what they want? They will hint around at it, but you are always kind of guessing as whether you're on their good side or their bad side. And it could change at any moment. It's a very tumultuous thing because there's always this concern that at any moment I could pivot from being in their favor to being in their disfavor. Human beings do this to each other. We hint. We make facial expressions, and then we expect people to kind of figure out. God does not do that. God does not sit around looking for you to kind of figure it out on your own. You know, if I had a problem with you, I wouldn't talk to you about it. I just want you to know. What do you want for your birthday? I don't know. And what you actually mean is, I want you to guess and get it right. That's not God. No, I was waiting. Which one is the one going to hit home? That's the one. That was the one. At least 50% of you laughed at that. What does Micah say? He has told you, O man, what is good. There's no guessing. There's no passive aggressive. There's no hidden thing that must be discerned, some mystery left unrevealed. In Jeremiah 10, Jeremiah says, I know, O Lord, that the way of man is not in himself, that it is not in man who walks to direct his steps. That is inspired text. So, not only does Jeremiah know that it is not in man, it is not in him to direct his steps, not only does Jeremiah understand, look, I cannot figure this out on my own. I need somebody to tell me what they want so that I can do what they want. Not only does Jeremiah understand that it's inspired text, that means God understands it too. And we looked at this morning in 2 Timothy. In 2 Timothy, it says, as for you, continue in what you have learned. Paul speaking to Timothy says, and if firmly believe, knowing from whom you have learned it, and know how from childhood you have been acquainted with the sacred writings which are able to make you wise for salvation. The sacred writings which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith in Christ Jesus. How has God told you what He wants? This book. This book. This book is a letter from God to His people. This book is a letter from God to anybody who wishes to be His people. This book is a letter from God to anybody who is not His people and would give the excuse, we didn't know what to do, God. We would have if we'd known. He has told you, oh man, what is good. The reason these writings are sacred is because God wrote them. They are inspired through Him. And they are the message of how to live in a way that is pleasing to Him. There is no mystery. It has all been revealed. There was a time when there were things and aspects of this mystery that man didn't know. But you and I, we live in a time where the mirror has been made so clear that we can absolutely understand the will of God. What a beautiful thing it is. God's will isn't a mystery. It has been revealed to us and to our children and to our children's children so that we might know what is good. So now let's talk about this summary of it. Because what Micah is doing is very similar to what we do when we talk about the first and second greatest commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, upon these two commandments, all the law and the prophets hang. In other words, it's a summary. It's a summarization of concepts you can spend your whole life getting better at. It's like if you're trying to explain to somebody how to play basketball, and you go, you see that thing over there? That's called a hoop. You see this thing? This is called a basketball. Get the basketball on the hoop. Is that a simplification of basketball? Yes, it is. Is that basically what you need to know? Pretty much. What we're looking at are three summaries of fundamental ideas. And the first one is, do justice. In Exodus, God will tell them, you shall not follow the masses in doing evil, nor shall you testify in a dispute so as to turn aside after a multitude in order to pervert justice. Nor shall you be partial to a poor man in his dispute. And Exodus will continue on in Exodus chapter 23 to list all of these things that the Israelites were to know as to how they were supposed to live. And we'll talk about some of those things and try and connect them to living in modern America. But ultimately, this idea that is being addressed by Moses to them is, you're not to twist justice. Don't pervert it. Because we live in a world where that is exactly what happens, where a poor man brings his case to court, and he's treated differently than a rich man who brings his case to court. You have your friend comes and they have done you wrong, and your enemy comes and they have done you wrong, and both apologize to you. whose apology are you more inclined to accept? It's always going to be the friend, isn't it? That's a perversion of justice, though. You see, in Exodus, he'll talk about things like returning people's stuff. And specifically, your adversary stuff. If you are traveling along the road and your adversary has an animal that's loose, and you see that his donkey or his mule or his cow is all loose and wandering around outside of the pasture, he says, you will surely take it back to him. Because that's the just thing to do. Return people's stuff. Well, today, you're not likely to see somebody's cow wandering in the road. Although, I got a cool story about exactly that happening to me. I was driving down the road, coming back from a meeting, and we were driving down the road, and it was like 5 cattle in the road. And you could see where they'd broken through the fence. Thought about this verse. So I had a thing I had to do. Thankfully, turns out I am terrifying to cattle. The moment we got out of the car, they immediately jumped right back in and they promised to stay. I am an amazing cattle wrangler. But it's just as true if you're walking through the grocery store and you see somebody's wallet on the ground. Do you pick it up and go, well, we'll return his license, but these green bills will look better in my wallet? No, right? You return people's stuff. What a different world it would be, right? What a different world it would be if every person just always knew that if I lost something, if I misplaced it, the next person that comes along will not try and take it for themselves. They will do their absolute best to make sure it is returned to me. Unfortunately, that's not the world that we live in. In fact, most of the time, if you drop money or something of that sort, you expect it to never be seen again. Anything of value you expect to be taken from you. But as Christians, if we will do justice, if we will be different than that, it does, in fact, stand out. If we help people with their problems, we consider that the problems of our fellow man are our problems too when we have ability to do something to help. And I will pause there. It's not, I have convenient ability to help them. Because in the case of the Good Samaritan, it was not convenient for him to help the man who had been beaten up on the side of the road. But do I have the ability to help them? That's what it means to do justice. To not play favorites. This is true inside the body of Christ. This is true inside your families, and it is also true inside society. If you treat people differently in the congregation, that's how you get congregations that have cliques and division, and eventually it implodes. If you have favorites within your family, you can see many examples of this in the Bible, of favoritism within parenting, and it never works out well. And if you have favoritism within society, what you end up with is polarization. When people who are voting one way treat people who are voting another way differently, you're playing favorites. Shouldn't matter what the guy's bumper sticker is, they're a human. There was a mean joke back when I lived out on the West Coast. It was a mean joke that people would play on each other. Not me, I never did it, so I should clarify that. It's a mean joke that other people, not Christians, but other people would play on each other is, if you knew somebody was driving into Seattle, you just put a Trump sticker on their car, and it would get keyed. Guarantee it. 100%. You want to mess with somebody? Go to a deep blue city and put a deep red sticker on it, and you will have problems. Now look, that's what we call polarization. They talk about it all the time in the news, the polarization of America. Polarization of America. What that really is we are mean to people who don't think like us. And that is not Christ's way. I'm not saying that all ideas are equal. or that everybody's truth is right. You've heard me. I've preached on this stuff. That's garbage. But I'm saying all people are people. We don't play favorites. All are made in the image of God. In Exodus, they'll also talk about this idea of not letting people get away with evil. That's another way we pervert justice, is when your buddy does the wrong thing and you let him get away with it. When you turn a blind eye to corruption and evil in this world, that is not doing justice. There should be an expectation of this is right and it's always right. And one thing that Christians should be known for as being those who stand up for other people when evil is being done. This idea of a quiet Christianity that you keep to yourself is the devil's work. It's not God's. We're meant to be people of faith who stand up for the oppressed, stand up for those who are hurting. We're the one who, if some injustice is being done to another person, I mean, what do we teach our children? Like, if there's a bully in the schoolyard, you be the one to say no. And we live in a culture where there's bullies in the schoolyard everywhere. And somebody has to say no. That's not okay. We don't treat people like that. We don't gossip about people. There's one where you have an opportunity to do justice. Somebody comes and they start telling you gossip, talebearing about another human being, things that they ought not to be saying. And every talebearer needs a listener. Refuse to listen and tell them, look, I'm not interested. We don't let people get away with evil. We don't take advantage of people. We protect. We provide for the weak. We see those in need and we do something about it. Christianity should be known for being those who help others, who love our neighbor as ourselves. And what you end up seeing when you look at a place like Exodus is that what God always intended in terms of not perverting justice isn't something that just happens in a courtroom. Certainly, justice needs to be upheld in courtrooms, but that's not where it even begins. Most of the time, as Christians, you should be avoiding courtrooms as often as possible. But doing justice is a daily effort to make the world in our small corner as it ought to be. One way to think of this is imagine instead of walking the streets of America or driving your car in Louisville or doing your grocery shopping in your part of town, imagine it wasn't Louisville, imagine it was heaven. What would you do if you were in heaven and you saw somebody hurting? What would you do if you were in heaven and somebody dropped their wallet? What would you do in heaven if you saw something that needed to be improved or bettered? Live like that's where you're going to be, and that you are a little taste of that redeemed world for this world so they might see the light of Jesus here. Do justice. The next is to love kindness. There are three areas in which we can love kindness. One is showing it. In 2 Samuel chapter 9, David says, "There's still anyone left in the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake." David understood the idea of showing kindness. He found Mephibosheth and he said, "Here is somebody I do not have any responsibility for, but I have an opportunity to do a good thing for. And Jonathan was good to me, and so I'm going to be good to Mephibosheth, and so I'm going to show him kindness. He will eat at my table. I will return his land to him." I've got the power, I've got the ability, I have the opportunity. As human beings, as Christians, we should constantly be looking for opportunities to do good to our fellow man. Undeserved good, not based off of correcting justice, but just based off of we like to do good things because it is more blessed to give than to receive. One simple way that you as a Christian can make the world a better place and live in the way that God has told you is to show kindness. Another is to lead with kindness. In the book of Hosea, it says, "Yet it was I who I who taught Ephraim to walk, I took them up by their arms. This is God speaking about how he dealt with Israel. But they did not know that I healed them. I led them with cords of kindness, with the bands of love. And I became to them as one who eases the yoke on their jaws, and I bent down to them and fed them. God compares his leadership of Israel to a kind owner of an ox. He says, look, I made sure that he could feed. I made sure that the yoke wasn't too heavy for him. I led thinking about him all the time. Every single one of us have leadership opportunities as Christians. And you can lead with an iron fist. You can lead and exert your authority just as Jesus said the Gentiles do. They lord it over them. Or you can lead with cords and bands of love and kindness. Leadership is an opportunity given to us by God for us to show people mercy and forgiveness and goodness, to lead with character and dignity. And so one way that you can love kindness is to lead with it. Whether you're leading your children, whether you're leading your family, whether you are leading in a classroom setting, whether you are leading in a workplace environment, whether you're leading in a pickup basketball game. These are opportunities for us to lead with kindness. And the last is to teach kindness. Proverbs 31 speaks of the Proverbs 31 woman and says she opens her mouth with wisdom and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. The Proverbs 31 woman, when she interacted with her children, they knew what it meant to be kind because they were taught what it meant to be kind. Teaching kindness is where you take the next generation and you give them the skills to do it even better than you have. I like to think that the Proverbs 31 woman didn't just live a Proverbs 31 life, but that she instilled that in her sons and her daughters so that they grew up to be Proverbs 31 people too. You teach, you show, you lead with kindness. And when you do that, what does the Lord require of you? You're doing the second one. You're loving kindness. And last is to walk humbly with your God. Do justice, love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. In Ecclesiastes, we're told, guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near, to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know that they are doing evil. Solomon understood as a wise man that the unfortunate truth is that most people are not listening. They're waiting their turn to talk. If you've ever been in a conversation with somebody and you're kind of talking over top of each other a lot, or you find that you are beginning your sentence and then you realize, oh, they haven't finished theirs, it's probably because one or maybe both of you are not very good at listening in that moment. To walk humbly with God is to understand we're the listeners, He's the speaker. Jesus is not made in our image, we are made in His image. He is the potter, we are the clay, not the other way around. When we become the potter and we try and make God the clay, there's a word for that, it's called idolatry. Idolatry is when we become the person who does the shaping and we do the talking. But instead we're told to guard our steps when we go to the house of the Lord, to draw near, to listen. I would argue, if all you did with your life is that every time you study the Bible, every time you hear a sermon, every time you read the Bible with a collective group, like we do in our classes, or do it individually, if you said, I'm going to walk away from this, whatever opportunity is that you have to dwell on the sacred writings, I'm going to walk away with this with an answer to the question of what do I need to do? Something that I need to do. It may be a way I need to change that I think. It may be a way that I need to change that I act. It may be a relationship that I need to mend. It may be a skill that I need to gain that I don't currently have. But no matter what, I'm going to walk away from this time with the Lord's word when he has told me, oh man, what is good. And I'm going to walk away with one thing that I can do. And then I'm going to go do that thing because that's what humility is. I'm going to walk away with it, not forget about it, and I'm going to go do something about it. You realize if all we did was that, every year you would have hundreds and hundreds of opportunities to improve and walk humbly with your God. In Isaiah, which if you remember is a counterpart to Micah, is addressing this problem of arrogance and a lack of humility in the people when he says, shall the axe boast over him who hews with it, or the saw magnify itself against him who wields it, as if a rod should wield him who lifts it, or as if a staff should lift him who is not wood. When you have the lumberjack and he holds the axe, yes, the axe is chopping the tree, but nobody really gives credit to the axe, right? The axe's strength is entirely dependent upon the one who wields. We need to get to a point in our lives where we realize we're just the axe. And I want to be a good axe, right? I mean, if the Lord's going to wield me, let me be a good axe. Let me be sharp. Let me be stout. Let me be faithful and trustworthy. The head's not going to fly off in the middle of the thing. I have a pickaxe that I had for years that the head would fly off on occasion, which makes for a whole interesting kind of process of digging ditches with your friends. It's the worst lottery ever. I couldn't trust it, right? You never knew when it would move from a tool to a weapon. I don't want to be that kind of axe. I want the Lord to know that if he wields me, then I'm gonna strike true. And I'll be sharp. And I'll be faithful. But still at the end, I'm just the axe. That's what it means to walk humbly with our God, is to remember, we're just the axe. We don't do the lifting, he does. We're just tools in the hands of the master. And so humility is understanding something. It's understanding your appropriate place in successes and in failures. Now, I want to take just a second, and I'm really at time here, but I want to take a second to explain what I mean by that. One, when you have a success in life, it was not all you. It's not about you. Yes, if you've done your job, if you've sharpened the axe and it's a faithful axe, and then the Lord wielded you and there was a good success, and he probably chose to use you because you were a vessel prepared. So yes, you did do something, and the Lord is pleased with you for the good that you did. But who actually cut the tree down? Not you, God. Do not get too boastful in your successes. But I would also argue that you need to be careful with humility and failures too, because sometimes when the world falls apart and everything goes bad, we take all the credit there. And guess what? That's wrong as well. Look, you do your part and you leave the rest to God. Vengeance belongs to him. The eternal destiny and judgment of man belongs to him. You just be the axe and let him use you. And when you keep those things balanced, then you can truly say that you are walking humbly with your God. Those three things: do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. Just keep it simple. What does it mean to serve God? You work on those three things, and you will be going the right direction. Now, we're about to sing a song. And during that song, it is a time of contemplation as well as praise to God. If you are not yet a Christian, I want you to contemplate you are like an axe that no matter how good it is not picked up. Your life has no meaning, no purpose, no value until it is owned and wielded by God. And your sins, no matter how bad they are, the Lord doesn't require 10,000 rivers of oil from you. He doesn't require of you 1,000 burnt offerings. Interestingly, the next thing that is said, does he ask of you 1,000 rams or 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for the sin of my soul? The answer is no. You couldn't even offer your firstborn and would pay. But guess who did offer his firstborn? God gave his firstborn son for the sin of your soul. And if you want to be washed clean, you can be buried with him through baptism, come out of that water, washed and clean. And today can be the first day of your life, the day of your salvation, the day that the Lord picks you up and says, I will wield this one from now on. If you're ready to do that, please come forward as we stand and sing.